Hello everyone, welcome to See Today. We're having a special interview with Deborah Elms, the head of the trade policy at Hinrich Foundation, and also the founder of ASEAN Trade Center here in the sidelines of Indonesia Economy Summit 2025. We'll be having a discussion related to the current state of the global economy and exploring how Indonesia can adapt to strengthen its position amid the global trade conflicts. Good morning, Dr. Elms. How are you?
Good.
Good. Wow, fantastic. Okay, so I would love to start this conversation, this interview, with the question, how do you see the current state of the global economy?
It's really in flux, and it's changing so fast that I think we are in a different place than we were even 4 weeks ago, and we'll be in a very different place 4 weeks from now. And so trying to understand the dynamics of the global economy is hard. That being said, it's not like the economy has stopped or that trade has stopped. It's just that the policy changes that are coming are very fast and furious. And the reaction of businesses and individuals and governments to those changes is lagging behind because it's taking people a while to process where are we at now compared to where we've been.
That's really interesting. You said that we were in different place 4 weeks ago and we will be in different place from 4 weeks from now. So what do you mean with that?
I just think that starting with the Trump administration in the US White House, their idea about what the global economy should look like and America's place in that space is very different from anything we've seen before, including his first administration. We're in a very different space. And as they roll out policies that they think will affect the US economy, the consequences for those outside of the US continue to mount. And so I think we're in that state of flux where the US, as the largest global economy and as the traditional protector of the global economy, moves out of that role. The implications are going to be serious.
So I see like some statements saying that the Trump moves with impose this tariff, it's just like he'll launch a frontal attack on the global free trade system created in the aftermath of World War II. So what do you think about this statement?
He has, in fact, launched quite the assault on the global trading system. The most obvious indication of that was actually last week when he announced what he calls reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal tariffs it's a bit complicated, but basically the argument is let's take the global trading system rules and the bedrock principles which say you're not allowed to discriminate against other members and that you have to treat other members the same. He's basically taken a wrecking ball to both of those and is perfectly happy to let the United States set a unilateral trade agenda and allow the rest of the universe to accommodate his wishes and demands. That's very different from where we've been for decades. And Trump has imposed 10% tariffs across the board on China already. Those are in place. But that's not his only target. And you know this because he started on day one. Well, first with Colombia and then with Canada, with Mexico.
So what about the emerging economies? What has been the impact of the Trump's policies on the emerging economies, especially in the Southeast Asia countries?
I worry a lot about what happens to developing economies, especially when you're in the law of the jungle, which is where we're headed. The largest players they're not great, but they're fine. Like of course, they have the power and the strength to be able to navigate crazy. Developing economies, even large ones, can really struggle in a law of the jungle. And when you get down to smaller, poorer developing economies, they are really at the mercy of what happens between the big players. Now you can say that's how it's always been, which is kind of true, but we've had this global trading system that at least tries to make it a little more fair for the developing economies, but that's now gone. So those emerging economies, developing economies are really at risk of having the fastest pathway to growth and economic development taken away, or at least changed dramatically. And it's not obvious who's going to protect their interests.
What is the impact for Indonesia?
For Indonesia, I think there's a couple of challenges. So one is, like many members in ASEAN, it runs, viewed from Washington, a bit of a trade deficit, again, viewed from Washington. It's got critical minerals, which Trump definitely wants. It's got regional grouping, which Trump doesn't like. And so there's a whole bunch of, and it's part of now BRICS, which Trump really doesn't like. So it's got some, real challenges ahead, but it may have some opportunities in that, again, it's not the top target for Trump at the moment. So you could sort of sneak through for a while, maybe you get through for 4 years or however long he's in office, or maybe not. So I think from Indonesia, again, the uncertainty is growing, and it's reasons for why I think Indonesia needs to remember to stay open and not turn protectionist itself, but also to work much more closely with neighbors, really do that ASEAN integration in ways that maybe were less relevant in the past, but are becoming super relevant now.
So you mentioned on the stage that the Southeast Asia countries play a significant role in this trade war. So do we still have a chance to secure our position to be like being strong to face this amid this global wars?
Yes, but the key is you have to stay together. Because if you're not careful, what will happen is Trump will pick off ASEAN members one at a time. And if that happens, then ASEAN members, it's why we have ASEAN. If ASEAN members have to go it alone, each one of them is too small to really influence outcomes. It's only as that collective 10 that you have some ability to influence policy outcomes.
But do you think that Trump has started doing that moves?
I think where you saw this right away was with Canada and Mexico. And Canada and Mexico, when they were approached with 25% tariffs right out of the gate when Trump was inaugurated, the two countries tried to coordinate between themselves, Canada and Mexico, to say we're going to have a common, the two of us. But almost immediately, Mexico threw Canada under the bus and said, we're going to negotiate our own deal, and then Canada had to negotiate its own deal. And I worry that if these two neighbors, Canada and Mexico, cannot stay coherent, ASEAN will have a hard time as well.
Oh, okay, I see. That's really...
Alarming.
We need to be concerned about this. Yeah.
Alarming.
Okay, so how do you assess the Indonesia's economic performance in these recent years?
I think it's done okay, but clearly it could do better. I mean, there's always this potential for us, for Indonesia in particular, to do well. It's got incredible natural resources. It's got very creative, innovative people. It's got this diversity of cultures and languages and backgrounds that could create something amazing, but it always, or often, underperforms relative to where it could. And so I would like to think that this is a moment where Indonesia does push through some challenging reforms to unleash those growth potentials and actually delivers growth and prosperity for the future for its own people.
Are there countries in Southeast Asia that can be a figure to look up to for Indonesia?
Well, yesterday's session here at this conference started with a long discussion about Vietnam, which I think is an interesting one because the Vietnamese government did seize the opportunity when it joined the World Trade Organization to make some serious domestic level reforms. And Vietnam then proceeded to connect to a lot of other players through different kinds of arrangements, and again used those as a way to help drive domestic level reforms. And the net result of that has been unbelievable growth in Vietnam, right? They've empowered from the largest firms to the small firms. They've become much more connected than they ever were before. They have tried to use that to drive more skills development, to try to make sure that their own people are prepared for those jobs of the future. And I think that sort of virtuous cycle is a pattern that is worth studying carefully.
Oh, I see. So Vietnam.
I think Vietnam is a good one because if you say, well, Singapore's been very successful, well, it's a totally different animal, So I think Vietnam has some interesting lessons, but it's not just Vietnam. I mean, you could look to anywhere. You could look to, for example, of course, Malaysia, but Malaysia, and how they've managed to leverage their capacity in one area, electronics in particular, to help power the larger economy. I think that's an interesting lesson. I would look at Cambodia in the way that Cambodia has seized on digital trade and the digital economy and regional integration as ways to try to push their diversification as well out of just textiles and manufacturing, garment manufacturing, into other areas. So I think there are examples all over ASEAN, and even examples, of course, within Indonesia, of success and even failure that should be studied.
So on the stage, you were one of the speakers on the discussion panel, and then the topic is ensuring Indonesia will be on the winning side in the global trade wars. It's really interesting. So my question is, how can Indonesia be on the winning side in the global trade war?
Well, there are many things I could recommend, but I'll just talk about two. So the first is to recognize that we are in a global trade war, or we're at least in a very different global environment, and keep an eye on that because it matters. It affects what happens in Indonesia, it affects what happens in the region. So remember this trade war. And then how can Indonesia resolve its place in there? This is that opportunity to use this trade war crisis to push through domestic level reforms that Indonesia has already talked about, is already preparing to do, but actually needs to deliver. And so I think if Indonesia moves out of the potential category and into, sort of delivering on those potentials, it should do quite well. It should do well in this sort of time of chaos at managing to set itself up well for right now, but also much better position for the future.
There are two superpowers countries in the conflict, the US and the China. The question is, do ASEAN need to take side? And which side that ASEAN need to look up to?
That's a great question.
United.
I would say, one of the things that ASEAN has done really well and should continue is to make the argument we are not interested in choosing. We have our own interests. We need to pursue our own interests. Sometimes as a grouping that will align us closer to the US, sometimes it will align us closer to China. Sometimes we will be opposed to both. But that's okay because we are acting in our own interests, which is the important part. It's not about like picking a winner in this case. It's about saying, what is it that we as a collective group in ASEAN, what do we want? How can we best achieve that? And I think a lot of what has been successful about ASEAN is its ability to navigate different groups. US, Europe, China, Middle East, whatever, developing countries. That's where I think the ASEAN sweet spot is.
Okay, great. Okay, my last question. What key policies should Indonesia prioritize to enhance its trade competitiveness on the global stage?
Another good question. I mean, I would say Indonesia is important because it's a large developing economy, one, but also because it's part of ASEAN too. And I think it needs to really reflect on, again, its own domestic needs and situation, and then align with other like-minded members in ways that support Indonesia's position, and in particular lean on ASEAN, but there may be other groupings as well that are important, and it could be like, the regional context outside of just ASEAN, but in Asia. It could be with other large emerging markets. It could be with developing countries. So I think you have to be flexible. And remember, what is it that it is in Indonesia's own interest, and then how can it cooperate with others to get more of what it wants? Because one-on-one, it's in trouble. It's not big enough to play with the US and China,
That's really great. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Elms.
Sure.
I hope that this interview will give a valuable lessons, valuable insights for our audiences.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
So stay tuned on Sit Today for more.